massive crystalline towers of the Galactic Council headquarters floated in the darkness of space, their surfaces glowing with thousands of urgent messages from across the galaxy. Each pulse of light carried news of another fallen world, another system consumed by an enemy that seemed unstoppable. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the mighty council faced complete destruction. Ambassador Kethver stood at the center of the great assembly hall, his four muscular arms moving frantically as he pointed at the holographic star map floating above the gathered representatives. Red zones marked the territories already lost to the enemy, and the red was spreading like a deadly disease across the galaxy. "The outer rim is gone," Kethver announced, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "Every world, every station, every living thing in 12 sectors has been consumed by the Void Harbingers. They eat planets like we eat fruit, leaving nothing but empty space behind." The assembled aliens shifted nervously in their seats. Some had tentacles that writhed with anxiety. Others had feathers that changed color to show their fear. The Council had always been the strongest force in the galaxy. It was protected by weapons that could destroy stars and shields that could stop entire fleets. But now, for the first time, they were losing. In the high galleries above, representatives from smaller, weaker species watched in growing terror. These were the races that the Council usually ignored or looked down upon. They had always believed that if anything truly dangerous appeared, the Council would protect them, and they realized how wrong they had been. Counselor this, a creature that looked like a giant snake with arms, slowly coiled her long body around her speaking platform. Her scales shimmered as she prepared to speak. "My fellow council members," she began, her voice smooth and cold. "We have considered every weapon, every strategy, every alliance. All have failed. But there is one possibility we have not explored." Chamber fell silent. Every eye, sensor, and antenna focused on her. "Our intelligence teams have been studying the outer edges of the galaxy," Thesis continued. "In a distant spiral arm, they found a small world called Earth. The species there calls themselves humans. They are primitive, barely beyond burning. Fossil fuels for energy. But our analysis shows something very interesting." She gestured, and a new hologram appeared, showing a blue and green planet covered in clouds. "These humans show remarkable ability to adapt their fighting methods. They have survived countless wars on their single world, always finding new ways to defeat their enemies. And most importantly, they show levels of aggression that even surprise our military analysts." The debate that followed was fierce. Some council members argued that using primitive species as soldiers was beneath their dignity. Others pointed out that they had done it before when facing smaller threats. But as more reports arrived showing core worlds beginning to evacuate their populations, desperation began to win over pride. "They are barely more advanced than animals," protested Counselor Vextar, his crystal body ringing like a bell with anger. "What could such primitives possibly do against the Harbingers?" "Sometimes," replied Thesis, "the most effective weapons are the ones your enemy does not expect. The Harbingers have consumed 17 advanced civilizations. We think how we fight, how we build our defenses, but they have never faced anything like humans." The voting process took hours. Representatives huddled in groups, arguing in dozens of different languages. Some species threatened to leave the council if the motion passed. Others threatened to leave if it failed. The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a blade. Finally, the vote was called. Ancient voting crystals glowed as each representative made their choice. The results appeared on the great display: 847 in favor, 823 against. By the narrowest margin in council history, humanity had been conscripted into a galactic war they knew nothing about. "It is decided," announced the council president, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We will make contact with the humans and offer them a place in our war effort. May the ancestors forgive us for what we are about to do." Far away, on a small blue world in the outer spiral arm, Dr. Kim Ji-ho sat alone in his observatory on a mountain in South Korea. He was studying distant stars, completely unaware that his entire species had just been drafted into a conflict that would either make them heroes or destroy them completely. The telescope in front of him showed the same stars that had been shining peacefully for millions of years. He had no idea that tomorrow, everything would change forever. Above Earth, the first Council scout ships were already beginning their approach, carrying with them an offer that would transform humanity from a single world species into players in a galactic war. The die had been cast, and there was no going back. The war for the galaxy's survival was about to gain its most unpredictable soldiers. The alien ship was bigger than any mountain on Earth. It came down through the clouds, like a giant metal city, blocking out the sun over New York. Every television, radio, and computer screen on the planet showed the same incredible sight. People stopped their cars in the middle of highways just to stare up at the sky in the United Nations building world. Leaders sat frozen in their chairs as something impossible happened right in front of them. The air in the assembly hall began to shimmer and glow, and then a figure appeared out of nothing. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal and eyes that glowed soft blue. When it spoke, every person in the room heard the words in their own language. "Greetings, people of Earth," the creature said, its voice somehow both mechanical and warm. "I am Ambassador Velthor of the Galactic Council. I bring you an opportunity that your species has waited for since you first looked up at the stars." Defense Minister Park Sun-ho had been a soldier for 30 years. He'd fought in 3 wars and survived 2 assassination attempts. Nothing surprised him anymore. But this was different. His hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Even though he knew a gun would be useless against something that could appear from thin air, "What exactly do you want from us?" Park asked, his voice steady despite the impossible situation. The alien smiled, which was somehow more disturbing than if it had remained expressionless. "Direct and to the point. I like that. Your species has qualities that we need. There is a war happening in the galaxy, a war that threatens every living thing in the universe. We need your help to fight it. And what do we get in return?" asked President Martinez, speaking for the first time since the alien had appeared. Velthar gestured, and the air filled with floating pictures made of light. They showed diseases being cured with single injections, machines that pulled unlimited energy from empty space, and cities that floated among the stars like jewels. "Medicine. That will end all sickness," the alien explained. "Energy that will solve all your resource problems. Knowledge that will advance your civilization by thousands of years. We offer you the stars themselves." The demonstrations that followed were beyond anything humans had ever imagined. A volunteer with terminal cancer was cured in minutes with a simple shot. A machine no bigger than a briefcase powered the entire United Nations building. Scientists who had spent their entire careers studying physics watched as their understanding of the universe was turned upside down. But Colonel Lee Min-jae was not impressed by the light show. She had been chosen to head Earth's new xenological defense division precisely because she was the kind of person who asked difficult questions. She stood up in the middle of the demonstration, her voice cutting through the amazed whispers of the other delegates. "This is all very impressive," she said, "but you still haven't told us what we're fighting. If you want us to send our people to die in your war, we need to know everything about the enemy." The alien's glowing eyes focused on her, and for a moment she felt like she was being examined by a microscope. "Of course," Velthor said. "A reasonable request. Our military advisors will provide you with all necessary intelligence." The aliens had expected humans to be like children, amazed by shiny toys and willing to follow orders without question. They had not expected to face a room full of people who had been fighting wars for thousands of years and knew how to spot a trap. Over the next several days, human military analysts worked around the clock studying the alien data. The information was overwhelming. Star charts showing battles across hundreds of worlds, casualty reports with numbers so large they were almost meaningless, technical specifications for weapons that could crack planets in half. But Dr. Cho Yuna, a military historian who had spent her career studying battle records, noticed something strange. The numbers didn't add up. She spread printouts across her desk, comparing different reports and looking for patterns. These casualty figures are wrong, she told her assistant, Lieutenant Kim Dong-woo. Look at this battle report from the Altair system. It says the Council lost 12,000 soldiers, but the tactical assessment shows they had 50,000 troops deployed. Maybe some units were evacuated, Kim suggested. No, look at the evacuation records. Only Council species were pulled out. The others were left behind. Yuna's face went pale as she realized what she was seeing. They're not counting non-Council casualties. These species are being used as cannon fodder. The pattern was everywhere. Once they knew what to look for, in every major battle, the advanced alien species would retreat to safety, while less advanced species held the line. The Council was willing to sacrifice entire civilizations to protect their own people. We need to tell Colonel Lee about this, Kim said. Yes, Yuna agreed, gathering up the evidence. But we need to be very careful about how we do it. If the aliens realize we've figured out their game, they might decide we're too dangerous to use. Outside the analysis center, Ambassador Velthor was giving another demonstration to impressed human officials. He had no idea that in a small room nearby, his species' greatest secret was being uncovered by the very people they planned to sacrifice. The truth was spreading through the human command structure like wildfire. Soon, everyone would know what the Galactic Council really thought of their new human allies. Sergeant Kim Tae-ho had always been good with computers. Back on Earth, he had been a hacker before joining the military, and old habits died hard. The Council assigned him to work with their data systems. They probably thought they were giving him busy work. They had no idea they were handing their secrets to someone who knew how to find hidden files. It was 3 a.m. on the Council battleship when Tae-ho found the cache. He had been trying to access routine supply reports when his scanner picked up a cluster of files that didn't belong. They were buried deep in the ship's memory banks, protected by encryption that would have stopped most people. But Tae-ho wasn't. Most people. The first file made his blood run cold. It was a battle report from something called the Deltarian War, fought 50 years ago. The Deltarians had been recruited just like humans, promised advanced technology and galactic citizenship in exchange for military service. The file showed exactly what happened to them. Deltarian forces successfully held Line 7 for 42 hours, the report read. All units lost. Core world evacuation completed successfully. Recommend similar recruitment protocols for future conflicts. All units lost. An entire species had been wiped out too by time for the Council to escape. And the report talked about it like it was a successful business transaction. Tae-ho's hand shook as he opened more files. The Crystalline Collective? Extinct after holding the line at Rigel. The Aquatic Federations. Sacrificed to slow the enemy advance through the Centauri sector. 17 different species, all recruited with the same promises, all abandoned when they were no longer useful. They're not allies, he whispered into his encrypted communicator. Knowing that Colonel Lee would be listening on the other end, they're using us as ammunition. The evidence was overwhelming. Every battle plan showed the same pattern, advanced. Council species would take the safe positions, while recruited species were sent to the most dangerous areas. When retreat became necessary, only Council forces were evacuated. The others were left behind to die. Colonel Lee's voice crackled through the communicator, tight with controlled anger. Send me everything you have, Sergeant. We need to confront them with this. The confrontation happened in Ambassador Velthor's private quarters on the flagship. Lee had demanded a private meeting, and the alien had agreed, probably thinking she wanted to discuss troop deployments. Instead, she placed a datapad on the table between them and activated the holographic display. Explain this, she said simply. Velthor looked at the files floating in the air between them. Battle reports, casualty lists, evacuation orders. His glowing eyes showed no surprise, no shame, no emotion at all. He studied the data for a long moment, then looked back at Lee. Every war requires sacrifices, he said, his voice as casual, as if they were discussing the weather. Your species understood this when you accepted our terms. We were lied to, Lee shot back, her voice rising. You promised us partnership, not execution. You were given a purpose beyond your primitive existence, Velthor replied, actually sounding bored. Your species will be remembered as heroes who helped save the galaxy. Be grateful. Grateful. Lee stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You're talking about genocide? I'm talking about necessity, the alien said. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Colonel. Sometimes lesser species must be sacrificed to preserve greater ones. This is the natural order. Lee realized with growing horror that Velthor genuinely believed what he was saying. To him, humans were just tools to be used and discarded. Council had never seen them as equals, never intended to honor their promises. They were expendable from the very beginning. We're withdrawing from this alliance, Lee said. I'm afraid that's not possible, Velthor replied. And now his voice carried a hint of threat. Your forces are already deployed across 12 star systems. They are integrated into our battle groups and dependent on our technology for survival. Without our support, they would die in ours. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Human soldiers were scattered across the galaxy surrounded by alien forces, relying on alien weapons and alien life support systems. They couldn't retreat even if they wanted to. In the Vega sector, Captain Han Suman was commanding 3,000 human soldiers when the coded message arrived. She read it twice, not believing what she was seeing. Then alarms began blaring throughout the ship as sensors detected incoming void harbingers. All units prepare for engagement, came the voice of the alien fleet commander. Council forces are implementing strategic withdrawal to defensive positions. Suman watched her tactical display as the alien ships began pulling back, leaving human forces exposed at the front of the battle line, just like the files had described, just like 17 other species before them. Captain, what are your orders? Asked Lieutenant Park Hyun-woo, her second-in-command. Suman looked at her crew. These men and women who had trusted her to lead them safely through an alien war, they deserved better than to be sacrificed for creatures who saw them as nothing more than ammunition. All human units, new orders, she broadcast on emergency frequencies. We're on our own now. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. The Council had made one critical mistake in their calculations about humans. They had assumed that betrayal would break humanity apart, making them easier to control and sacrifice. Instead, it did the exact opposite. When humans learned they had been lied to, they didn't panic or surrender. They got angry. And angry humans were dangerous in ways the Council had never imagined. Major Jung Woobin found himself stranded on a mining world called Kepler 442b with 200 human soldiers and no way home. The Council forces had withdrawn. During the night, taking all the transport ships and leaving the humans to face the approaching void harbingers alone, it should have been a death sentence. But as Woobin and his team searched the abandoned mining facilities, they discovered they weren't alone. Hidden in the deep tunnels were survivors from other species, creatures that had been left behind in previous wars. There were Deltarians with their insect-like bodies, crystalline beings that looked like walking gemstones, and dozens of others that Woobin had never seen before. They did this to you too, Woobin told the gathered refugees through a universal translator. The Council used you as shields and then abandoned you when it was convenient. A Deltarian warrior named Clix9 stepped forward, his forearms clicking together, and what Woobin had learned was a sign of agreement. We have been hiding here for 30 years, Clix9 said, waiting for the Council to come back for us. They never did. Well, we're not the Council, Woobin replied. We keep our promises. If you help us fight, we'll get you off this rock alive. The resistance started small. Human units across the galaxy began sharing their supplies with abandoned alien forces. They provided medical aid to survivors, established secret communication networks. Most importantly, they kept their word. When humans said they would come back for someone, they did. Word spread quickly through the underground networks that these new aliens were different. They didn't see other species as expendable. They actually cared about keeping their allies alive. Within weeks, human forces had gained thousands of new recruits from species that the Council had written off as extinct. Dr. Yoon. Hannah was working in a field hospital on the edge of Council space when she made the discovery that changed everything. She had been studying tissue samples from Void Harbinger attacks, trying to understand how they consumed matter so completely. But the patterns she found made no sense. The Void Harbingers aren't just consuming matter, she reported to General Command through encrypted channels. They're running from something. Look at their movement patterns. They're not expanding randomly into new territory. They're fleeing in a specific direction. The data was clear once someone knew what to look for. The Harbingers always moved away from the galactic core, always chose paths that led them further from the center of the galaxy. They weren't conquerors looking for new worlds to devour. They were refugees running from something even worse. This revelation completely transformed human strategy. Instead of simply fighting the Harbingers head-on like the Council had been doing for decades, human forces began hurting them. They used the creatures' natural fear response to drive them away from populated systems and toward empty space. Where they couldn't hurt anyone, it was a tactic that required understanding the enemy rather than simply trying to destroy them. Council had never considered this approach because they saw the Harbingers as monsters to be eliminated. Humans saw them as frightened animals to be guided away from populated areas. Commander Ogiwan led the most dangerous mission of the war. She volunteered to infiltrate a Harbinger hive ship, a massive living vessel the size of a small moon. Her job was to plant tracking devices that would let human forces monitor Harbinger movements and predict their next targets. The inside of the hive ship was like being inside a giant stomach. The walls pulsed with organic light, and the air was thick with spores that made breathing difficult even through her environmental suit. But as Giwan made her way deeper into the ship, she began to notice something strange. The Harbingers weren't acting like predators. They were acting like prey. "Command, this is Juwan," she whispered into her communicator. "I'm seeing something incredible here. The Harbingers aren't monsters. They're refugees. Our young ones here, families. And they're all terrified." She found the central chamber of the hive ship, a massive space filled with what could only be described as a refugee camp. Thousands of Harbingers of all sizes huddled together, their bodies glowing with patterns that Jiwan realized were probably some form of communication. They weren't planning attacks on human worlds. They were trying to figure out where to run next. "There's something in the galactic core that's hunting them," Kiwan reported back. "Something that scares them so much they're willing to destroy entire planets just to fuel their escape." Truth was about to reshape the entire war. The real enemy wasn't the Void Harbingers. It was whatever was chasing them from the heart of the galaxy. Something so terrible that it drove entire species to become refugees who consumed worlds just to survive. And now, thanks to human curiosity and courage, they finally knew what they were really fighting against. The Great Council Chamber had never seen anything like it. For 1,000 years, only the most advanced species in the galaxy had been allowed to speak from the central platform. Now, a human general stood there, surrounded by creatures that the Council had declared extinct decades ago. General Kim Mingi looked small compared to the massive alien representatives filling the chamber, but her voice carried clearly through the universal translators. Behind her, holographic displays showed data that made the assembled council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Members of the Galactic Council," she began, "you have been fighting the wrong war for 50 years. The displays showed the galactic core, where something ancient and terrible was stirring. Deep scans revealed structures that were clearly artificial, machines the size of solar systems that had been sleeping for millions of years. Now they were waking up, and there. The first act was to begin consuming everything around them. "The Void Harbingers aren't your enemy," General Kim continued. "They're refugees. They've been trying to escape from this." She gestured to the images of the awakening machines. "And instead of listening to them, you've been killing them for trying to warn you." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives from dozens of species shouted denials, their various forms of communication creating a chaotic symphony of outrage, but the evidence was undeniable. Human scientists had solved in months what Council researchers had missed for decades. "Impossible," screeched Counselor These, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. "The Harbingers are mindless destroyers." "No," said a new voice from the platform. Clix-9, the Deltarian warrior who had survived on the mining world, stepped forward. We tried to tell you. Before you abandoned us, we tried to explain what we had learned. But you called us primitive and refused to listen. One by one, survivors from the 17 supposedly extinct species came forward. Each had a story of trying to warn the Council about the real threat, and each had been ignored or silenced. The Council had been so sure of their own superiority that they refused to consider that lesser species might know something they didn't. You created this war through your own arrogance, General Kim declared, her voice cutting through the noise. The Harbingers were trying to warn you about what's coming, but you were too proud to listen to species you considered beneath you. Ambassador Velthar rose from his seat, his metallic form shaking with rage. You dare come here and lecture us. We have ruled this galaxy since before your species learned to make fire. And look how well that's worked out, General Kim replied calmly. 17 species extinct. Billions of lives lost, and you still don't understand what you're really fighting. The displays changed, showing the new strategy that human forces had developed. Instead of fighting the Harbingers, they had learned to communicate with them. The creatures weren't mindless destroyers. They were frightened refugees who had been forced to consume worlds to fuel their escape from something far worse. Here are our terms, General Kim continued, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. Full reparations to all affected species. Complete governmental reform with representation for every sentient species. And most importantly, you will never again conscript unwilling participants into your wars. The silence that followed was deafening. No one had ever dictated terms to the Galactic Council before. The very idea was unthinkable. You demand we bow to primitives. Belthor's voice was filled with disbelief. I demand you start acting like the wise leaders you claim to be, General Kim shot back. Power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. You've proven that 17 times over. A debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members argued for war against the humans. Others pointed out that human forces had already proven they could defeat council armies. The survivors from the extinct species spoke quietly but powerfully about the price of council arrogance. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Faced with the evidence of their failures and the reality of human capabilities, the council accepted. The terms, the old order was dead. Something new would rise in its place. 3 months later, Colonel Lee Min-jae stood in a memorial garden on Earth, reading the names carved into black stone. These were the humans who had died in the Council's war, soldiers who had trusted their leaders and paid the ultimate price for that trust. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. Above the names, words in 100 different languages delivered humanity's message to the galaxy. The inscription had been written by survivors from all the species that had been sacrificed, working together to create something that would never be forgotten. We do not start wars, but we will finish them, the words read. We do not abandon our own, and we will not abandon yours. The warning had been delivered. The galaxy had been given a chance to choose wisdom over power. The real war against the ancient machines in the galactic core was just beginning. But this time, every species would fight together as equals. The age of the Council was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and in the depths of space, the ancient machines continued their slow awakening, unaware that the galaxy they planned to consume was no longer divided against itself.